Ready? We see the beginnings of the crack in Judah and the south start to take place here after a few bad kings. After Josiah, we see it in chapter 24, verse 10. And we call these the three deportations. The deportations were all activities of the Babylonians who have come down now and are slowly taking away groups of people into exile in three waves, we might say. Chapter 24, verse 10 through 14. Let's take a look at that. Let's see, is Michael Woodridge here? No, not today. All right, let's go back to Benjamin. No, he's not here. All right, back over to Caitlin. Could you read for us in chapter 24, verse 10?
At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city became under siege. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city with his servants who were besieging him. Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants, the captains and his officials. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. He carried out from there all of the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all of the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord, just as the Lord had said. And then he led away into exile all of Jerusalem, and all of the captains, and all of the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, all of the craftsmen and all of the smiths, and none remained except for the poorest people of the land.
Okay. So you see that this was an erosion taking place. What's interesting, parallel to this slow dismantling, you might say, of Jerusalem, is the prophetic ministry of Jeremiah, the prophet, who's going to be literally on the streets of Jerusalem. When you read the prophet Jeremiah, you need to have that as your backdrop. Who is he talking to? He's still talking to groups who are in Jerusalem, who are part of the majority of unfaithful, who need to be told that they're in error and need to repent. Or occasionally, he may be addressing his message to the faithful remnant, who are asking the question, you're telling us that Jerusalem's going to fall. Has God given up on us yet? Is he giving up on us? The answer is no, of course. The day of the Lord is coming for you. Or Jeremiah talks about his new covenant, or things like that. But these deportations happened in three waves. In 605 BC was the first one, 605 BC, and that one involved Daniel and his friends. And then the next one was about 597, and that would involve the prophet Ezekiel. And then finally, the last one really lines up with the total fall of Jerusalem in 586. And that's when the city falls and Jerusalem falls and the exiles go into Babylon. So this was what was going on at this time period. We've got a lot of prophetic activity in the backdrop. And we see in 2 Kings 25...
Is 605 the Assyrian exile? Or are we talking about waves of the Babylonian exile? I'm confused on dates. Sorry.
Wave of the Babylonian exile.
Okay, these are the three waves of the Babylonian.
Yeah, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
Assyrian exile, what was that date?
In 722.
Oh.
Yeah, 722 was when Samaria fell. Now we're talking about the period of fall, well, down here, the events leading up to the fall of Jerusalem in 586. So, Jerusalem. So that's what we're talking about here. So in 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 8 through 12, we have some details of the destruction of Jerusalem. And you'll see some parallel accounts here to similar texts and descriptions in the prophet Jeremiah. Let's have, let's see, Ryan. There you are. Could you read for us in chapter 25, verses 8 through 12?
Now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen.
Okay, so this is the group that Jeremiah is still back in Jerusalem ministering to. There's still a group of the poorest of the poor, you might call them, left behind. And we know that Jeremiah is going to have a prophetic ministry with this group. But we talked about this before. Judah as a nation now has ceased to exist. What happens when a nation ceases to exist or is totally destroyed? She loses her king, and she, loses her land. So she ceased to exist. So really, we've got this crisis moment. The faithful remnant are going to be asking questions like this: What about those promises that God made to King David in the Davidic covenant? What about the promised seed of Genesis 3:15? Will we ever be a nation again? Will we ever have a king again? These are the things. Who will be that king? Some of them thought it might be Josiah, like he's the one who's going to, he's as close to David as we can get, Jeremiah, let's turn to the prophet Jeremiah. And so I mentioned before these parallel passages, and we have it coming out of the book of Jeremiah. Chapter 29. The prophet Jeremiah is now ministering to these exiles who are a part of this poorest of the poor bunch back in Jerusalem. Let's see, have Michael? Yeah, right over here. Could you read for us? And now, Jeremiah chapter 29, beginning in verse 1.
This is the text of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the rest of the elders of the exiles, the priests, the prophets, and all the people Nebuchadnezzar had deported from Jerusalem to Babylon. This was after King Jeconiah, the queen mother, the court officials, and the officials of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen and the metalsmiths had left Jerusalem. The letter was sent by Elisah, son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, had sent to Babylon, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. The letter stated, "This is what the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says to all the exiles I deported from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat the produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give daughters to men in marriage, so that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. Seek the welfare of the city I have deported you to. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for when it has prosperity, you will prosper. For this is what the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says. Don't let your prophets who are among you and your diviners deceive you, and don't listen to the dreams you elicit from them, for they are prophesying falsely to you in my name. I have not sent them. This is the Lord's declaration. For this is what the Lord says. When 70 years for Babylon are complete, I will attend to you and will confirm my promise concerning you to restore you to this place. For I know the plans I have for you. This is the Lord's declaration. Plans for your welfare, not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. You will call to me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you. This is the Lord's declaration. And I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and places where I banished you. This is the Lord's declaration. I will restore you to the place I deported you from."
Okay. I think that's the end of verse 14, yeah. Yeah, it's like places like this that we see Jeremiah the prophet really showing up a lot like and sounding a lot like Moses. Moses was the one that first said, when you are exiled and when you go to that foreign place, when you're there and you turn your heart remember back in Deuteronomy 28 and 29, there's those places there that talk about what the Lord will do in bringing back the exiles. But it's all conditioned on the heart change. And this is what we start to see happening with this group of exiles. If we turn to Ezekiel, we'll talk more about this next fall, but Ezekiel is another prophet who's really addressing the same group. And in the famous dry bones passage in chapter 37, you see this emphasis come back of the restoration of the reunion of Judah and Israel. That's in the plan. So say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will take the sons of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side, and bring them into their own land, and I will make them one nation in the land, and on the mountain of Israel, and one king, here's our bookends idea, will be king over all of them, and they will have no longer be two nations, and they will no longer be divided into two kingdoms, and they will no longer defile themselves with their idols, or with their detestable things, or with any of their transgressions, but I will deliver them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. So, again, we start to see this. The prophets are recognizing there's unconditional promises that the Lord has made. We understand why we're here, but we understand, too, that the Lord is not through with us yet. He's still got some more work to do.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
What was the nature of their exile? Like, were they slaves to the Babylonians? Were they just living? Like, did the Babylonians just want to, be like, we're ruling over you, so you have to live in our places? Or did they,
Yeah, they deported they would deport the nations that they conquered, and it was kind of like a ghetto situation in World War II. Okay. So they would be still allowed to be intact, but, oversight. They would serve the Babylonians in various capacities. It was not prime and pristine living conditions by any stretch, so it was harsh.
But were they when they went into exile with the Egyptians, was it something similar to when they were when the Israelites were living in the land of Egypt and they became slaves to the Egyptians, or was it something different?
Maybe not Sure, I'm trying to maybe make a comparison. Would they be in the same category as slaves? I suppose so. I mean, they'd be, I'm thinking of the ghetto situation in World War II. They weren't really, the Jews were not slaves, but they were kept. They were allowed to be they were kept track of and isolated as a unique people. And but then weren't free though. So maybe I guess that would be a slavery situation. They've lost their freedom. They've lost they don't have a king. They don't have a temple. So technically, they've ceased to exist as a nation. So the Babylonians have done all those things necessary to say, you no longer exist as a people. And but yet, thankfully, kept intact so that over time, Ezekiel and others could get the spiritual attention of the group. And it's like Israel in the wilderness, For 40 years, Israel's stripped of all her distractions, and the Lord works to get the attention of this group that is going to be the generation that takes the land. It's a lot like that for the group that's gone into Babylon now for 70 years, and it's that slow stripping of all of the distractions, really, which was necessary to be relocated because you can't be around all those pagan temples. But yet they go to Babylon, and it's really under the preaching ministry of Ezekiel and others that 22,000 plus return. That's a long journey back home, to be under the oversight of the Persians at that time. So, all right. Let's see what I've got here. So we talked about, we compare the thesis statement now of both judges and kings. God was not king in Israel. Everyone was doing whatever was right in his own eyes. And I came up with one for kings, if this might help you. God was not king in Israel, even though Israel and Judah had her kings, and everyone was still doing whatever was right in their own eyes, for the most part. You've got a few reforming kings in Judah. You've got 8 zero in Israel who are really doing anything. There's none evaluated positively. And I think we have to go back to Deuteronomy, to Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 30. And we understand what's the real solution. This is probably where a lot of the prophets and perhaps the faithful remnant at the time were having their quiet time reflections, going back to the words of Moses in chapter 30, beginning in verse 1. So it shall be when all of these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I've set before you, and you call them to mind in the nations where the Lord your God has banished you. That would get the attention if you were in exile, wouldn't it? That's me. You'd raise your hand and say, okay, what's next? And you return to the Lord. That's the language of repentance. Return, not just turning around in a physical sense, but it's the turning around or reorienting one's heart, which gets back to the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, in response to the reality that there's one king. So you return to the Lord with your God and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons. There's the if then. Then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you and will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are to the ends of the earth, no problem. From there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you back. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than all your fathers. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, in order that you may live. So, interesting that Moses had dropped in all of these references to, and here I'm focusing on, the idea of heart, the idea of the circumcised heart, and the new heart that Jeremiah is going to talk about with the new covenant, and some of those things that we'll see when we look at that in the fall. All right, so we see a similar thesis statement here, I guess, with the author of Kings, I'd suggest, and then solution. So in exile, you would read this historical account, and what effect would it have on you? It might suggest that there's no glimmer of hope. Is the author here leaving us totally disbanded and distraught, with no glimmer of hope at all? And I think that we have to look closely at the words of 2 Kings chapter. We'll go back to 2 Kings. Near the end of his book, 2 Kings chapter 25. In the very last words of his book. What's interesting is the author of 2 Kings actually leaves a little bit of encouragement right at the end, kind of like what we'll see, or what we've talked about at how the book of 2 Chronicles ends as well. And I'll talk about that briefly. Chapter 25, beginning in verse 27. Now it came about in the 37th year of the exile. So this is 37 years in of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. And Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. So we have a little bit of a glimpse here from the author of 2 Kings that the line of David has not been extinguished. Still, we get to the very end. Even in exile, even though the nation has ceased to exist technically, we still have one from the line of King David who is still around. And you might say that the words of Genesis 3:15 the promise, the seed of the woman is down but not out, right? We still have this encouragement. So one from the line of King David is now being brought back and released and is treated as a king, it seems like. In Isaiah chapter 6, let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 6, verse 13. We may have a little bit of a connection here to the prophet Isaiah in chapter 6, verse 13. There's this picture of the stump, this tree that's been felled in verse 13 in chapter 6. Yet there will be a 10th portion in it, and it will again be subject to burning, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. So if we connect that to Isaiah chapter 11, let's turn to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. So there's this prophetic recognition here in some of this kind of language that the line of David has not been complicated with the events of the exile. Maybe we could go back to 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 5. 2 Samuel 23, verse 5. In David's last song, truly is not my house so with God, for he has made an everlasting covenant with me, ordered in all things and secured for all my salvation and all my desire. Will he not indeed make it grow? So maybe there's a kind of a prophetic reflection there on, there's this stump, tree's been felled, but from the stump will grow a shoot. And something good will happen from that. So I think we can make the case that even in the midst of this long litany of discouragement, the author of 2 Kings has left us with a little bit of word of encouragement, perhaps.
Is there a question on that?
Nope, no questions allowed. Okay, just kidding. I'll try.
Well, just was Daniel in the picture at this point, and did he have any kind of influence in this connection between the king and the king of whatever at the end here? Evil Mordecai became king and he pardoned. Did Daniel have any influence? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Daniel's working behind the scenes, overlapping the Babylonian and the Persian rulership. I'd have to look at the details to see. There's some significant things that Daniel does with regards to the decrees of the Persian kings. Well, not only the Cyrus decree, but the Darius decree. There's two decrees that are pretty significant in allowing certain things to happen that are favorable for the group that's gone back from exile into Jerusalem. So, but of course, Daniel's also grabbing onto his prophetic word is going to focus a lot on the Son of Man. Is kind of this. I'm not going to be able to do it justice, but I wasn't prepared to talk about this. But just the growing theology, right, of the Messiah, just like what we see with Isaiah and the suffering servant passages. And who is this Son of Man? What is he going to do when he comes? Some of those questions start to be answered by Daniel, prophets like that. And he's serving faithfully like a Joseph, working behind the scenes, but he's got this prophetic ministry going. So, all right. So this is the, let's see. I don't know if I want to spend all this time. We've talked about this before. I just want to bring this in because just as in a similar way, we have these two major historical accounts that end on a positive note. That's what I want you to kind of see here. You're not going to get this in any Old Testament surveys. It's just, this is kind of something that I think is worth noting. But as we've just seen, the end of 2 Kings ends on a positive note with regards to, there's a seed that we have not given up on, the seed of David, the line of David. The author of Chronicles will bring the Cyrus decree, as we've seen, in the very end of his historical account. So how does Chronicles end? It ends with the Cyrus decree. And we've seen how he cuts it off deliberately, selectively. He chooses to do that. And he leaves off the back end of the Cyrus decree. So I think, like the author of Kings, expecting the seed of David, it's not done. Something will sprout and eventually grow. I think we have a similar emphasis from the author of Chronicles, the chronicler. Let him go up is his last word. That's what we read in the close of the Hebrew canon. So I think the chronicler is acting like a little bit of a prophet here. And based on the close of history, he's writing now, the chronicler is writing to that exilic audience. And a little bit of prophetic encouragement to them. They've come back and accomplished so much. They've rebuilt the temple, the walls of the city. They've been having church. They've got problems, but they too need encouragement. And the prophetic encouragement, I think, again, falls in line with this now emerging kind of this growing encouragement. Let them go up. Where am I supposed to go? What's the answer? Well, to the mountain of the King, to Zion, where he's going to be eventually rethroned. And when that happens, water and blessing and life will flow as a means of extending out and far-reaching to all of the nations. They'll be coming to hear the teaching, the Torah teaching of the Lord, the King himself. And we'll be part of that, you know. We in this room will be part of that as well. So that's encouragement to us, to us as well. So that idea of going up, I think, lines up well with, we were in Isaiah. We'll just turn back a few chapters to Isaiah chapter 2. And we see that going up emphasis in Isaiah 2 and Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. So this is one of the prophetic visions. Now it will come about in those days, in those last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream up to it. And many peoples will come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths, for the Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge between nations and will render decisions for many peoples, and they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation. Never again will they learn war. Thankfully, we have that message. This whole period in history has been fraught with wars, ongoing instability, and we, as we've seen, war crimes and all of this tragedy that's part of the sinfulness of humanity. But not in those days, not on the day of the Lord. So I think that would have been an encouragement as well. And you've got this picture, I've shown it before. This great picture of everything, the water and the king who's ruling in the nations. And there's Aslan right there, you know, and the lion and the lamb laying down. So this is the picture that we see that's coming. And just just as a way of reminder, we talked about this hermeneutical idea of making sure that we were always placing the human author in his historical context. And now that I think you've seen that this author of Kings, this historian, is very theologically astute. You know, he's got his Bible down. He's divinely inspired. He's looking back. He's evaluating the past, but he's also anticipating the future. And this is the author of Kings, his vantage point. You know, he's got a lot going on in the world around him as he's looking back and looking ahead. He's, I would argue, part of the group that's in exile. This is a group that would be really, really interested in this. What's happening? What's going to happen next? Kind of question. And I'd make the case that the authors of both the author of Chronicles and the historian, the author of Kings, and the author of Chronicles, the chronicler, are really interestingly similar, even though they're talking to two different audiences. Just as a way of reminder, of course, I think the historian, the author of Kings, is writing to the exiles in Babylon who needed to know and be reminded, and with great emphasis, why are we in exile? And then the chronicler is writing to the group that's come out of exile, they've already, that message is in their heart of hearts, right? They've come back and they're making this journey because they want to. They've been allowed to come back. So they need to be encouraged, and that's what we have and we'll see in the chronicler. The emphasis on the failed monarchy to provide spiritual solution, but the chronicler is going to emphasize the bright spots, the positive moments in the monarchy, but also emphasize God's agenda with regards to those bright spots. And finally, encouragement to the faithful remnant that the Davidic king has taken a throne again. So there's a bright hope, a bright spot, but the encouragement to the faithful remnant that a king is coming to take his throne. The exiles that come back, they're going to have a governor, Zerubbabel, not a king. He's going to have a tight leash to the Persians. So really the question is, when are we going to have a king who's coming on the scene? All right. Well, we got through kings. Whew, there's a lot there. There was but it's theologically rich and it's helpful in so many ways to a lot of what might be going on in our modern context. We've got groups of faithful remnant who are around, and we've got political situations that are semi-stable at best, perhaps. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know what the future holds, right? We can encourage our Sunday school classes and our small groups and our congregations with the message that as members of the faithful remnant, we see that the Lord is always active to encourage the faithful remnant, always with the same, as a very similar message. The day of the Lord's coming, and it's a day for you. That's our future. And as it was for them, as it is to today, we're part of the faithful remnant in that same, in that same pathway. So we can be encouraged as well and go to passages like this to help our folks understand, even in the midst of chaos, there's still hope. And that's what we have to look forward to. So let's end now. And I didn't even get to wisdom. That was next, right there. We're not behind. Let me just give a disclaimer. That don't be worried that you see a word like Psalms or Proverbs in the class syllabus, in the course schedule. We might be a couple blocks off, but that's okay. I put those words in the course schedule just to kind of keep you on track. If you want to maybe pause a week on the reading quizzes and kind of let us get caught up where we are in the lecture, that's fine. You know that I'm not going to take points off for a reading quiz. That doesn't have a hard stop, the reading quizzes. I want you to stay current with the discussion groups, though, as we move ahead. So if you want to postpone a reading quiz, that's fine. I think we're this week's Proverbs, right? Proverbs for this week. But we'll eventually get caught back up and finish the class entirely in line and in sync with the course schedule. So just thank you for your patience with your professor on that. I've not taught this class in this way before, so it wasn't exactly, not that I couldn't put my prophet hat on to know exactly how long I take to talk through and work through all of this material with you. So, all right. Well, let's end.